Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 30. 30. Yeah. The big 3-0. 3-0. I hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, anime.
Yes.
Anime, in general.
Yep, just a broad discussion.
About anime, particularly films.
Yes.
Anime films. Joining us this week is a dear friend of mine who we met in a cinema.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Film people made in.
Exactly. It couldn't be any more perfect. Yeah. The lovely Giordana is here, as promised, to help us wade through the sort of exhaustive amount of anime films on offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly for me, I don't know a tremendous amount about it. I haven't seen an awful lot of it, so to have a sort of expert on is like a
no pressure. I'm an expert. Yeah. I'll try my best.
Yeah, no, it's just nice to obviously have someone on who has a bit more of a reverence for it, to maybe help me understand it a little bit better. So yeah,
sure.
Yeah, likewise. I feel like my knowledge of it is pretty good in certain areas. Like I think a lot of the sort of, when you talk about anime movies, it would be, your Studio Ghibli's, your Satoshi Kon films, or like Akira, Ghost in the Shell. So, yeah, like obviously that would be, I think, where a lot of our discussion will be today. But obviously, I'm sure you'll have plenty of other things you'd like to recommend, which I'm really excited for.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Let's do it.
Let's go.
Nice.
Questing the cinematic void.
So I guess before we sort of get into some specific examples of films that we like or directors that we like, I sort of thought it'd be interesting to try and take a stab at trying to identify why anime is as popular as it is.
Yeah.
Because I think, like so many things, it starts out as like a subculture.
Yep.
Which is sort of fiercely guarded by a group of people that are really into it, and is typically sort of maligned or mocked by everyone else that isn't in it. I sort of feel that way about like video games. For a long time, video games was the same.
Yeah.
It was this sort of, it started out being for kids, and then those kids grew up with the games.
Yeah.
And, if, for a very long time, if you were a guy playing games past like a certain age, you were like a weirdo.
Yeah.
And I always think it's really fascinating to sort of see how a subculture transitions its way into the mainstream.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm just really interested to get your thoughts on why, with anime in particular, that is the case, because it's so huge now.
Yeah,
isn't it? Like, it's so big.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's on every streaming platform.
Yeah.
And it inspires a lot of Western media as well. Most notably something like Scott Pilgrim, for example. Heavy influence there. That kind of goes back to that. The subculture becoming more mainstream, and used by a director who is overtly very mainstream, and his influences previously were like action films and stuff. And so for him to Edgar Wright, for him to kind of make a film that has influences that are clearly from from anime. That's sort of very flattering, but it wasn't always that way. That I remember that vividly. So Yeah,
it's actually been really nice to see how popular anime has become. Because I remember when I started watching anime, especially for girls, it used to be like a very boys type of thing.
Okay,
and you couldn't. Same for video games. I remember when it started getting accepted. Obviously I'm talking about Italy. I'm not sure how it worked here.
Okay.
But when it started being more mainstream, it started being accepted for boys. But if you were a girl watching anime or playing video games, you were still very much like a loser.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So it took even longer for women to be able to say that they were into those kind of things.
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to see that now I can see all kinds of people just being proud.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I was never sort of around many sort of anime circles growing up as a kid in school. The people I met who were really into it, I sort of met when I was at college. So I was like 17, 18.
Yeah.
So until then, my interaction with it was fairly limited. Of course, it was mostly Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
And even then, I wasn't that into Dragon Ball Z. It was more Pokemon, just because of the cards and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously the Game Boy games. But I'm interested in that point that you were saying earlier, Ben, about how Western directors that are clearly influenced by something which I'm not sure if it was like a subculture in the sort of in the sort of 90s and early 2000s, but it was obviously something that wasn't as big as it is now. And you've got filmmakers like Edgar Wright or Guillermo del Toro,
of course,
or Wes Anderson, professing their love for this art form, this medium, and in some cases very literally taking a lot of the sort of artistic decisions and stylings, and bringing it over to live action cinema. So I've never quite considered that as like an angle, that actually that the people that have been influenced by it may have had a hand in bringing it's a sort of like a more mainstream realm.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, going back to Scott Pilgrim, and I can't think of any other examples at this point, but there's like anime lines in it. They call them anime lines, which is a way of like conveying speed. So it's when a character's moving very quickly towards another character, usually like with a clenched fist, and behind them it's like a really cheap way of conveying motion. I think cheap might be the wrong word, but through animation, motion blur is quite difficult. So you have in anime, I'm sure you probably know what I'm talking about, is in the background you have these white lines that change, and it kind of gives off the impression that there's motion there. And that translated to Scott Pilgrim, even though it didn't need to, like, because you can do motion blur with film and 35mm, but it was clearly like a really overt visual influence that after watching that, a lot of people who previously probably weren't that bothered by it were like, where's that from? Like, I've got to seek this out. Like, and as audiences became more active and were more interested in the way films were made and what films were inspired by, they landed at anime. Like, I also think that there's something oddly, I think I find it a bit strange, but a lot of Western audiences are fascinated by Japan. There's a real like interesting fascination with that culture, I think, because there's a lot of differences that are quite like overt, whereas I don't know, if you think about a lot of European countries, the differences are a little bit more subtle, and there's a crossover with lifestyle that perhaps maybe isn't as present in Japan as well. So that could be, another reason, as the world gets smaller, people are just fascinated by Japan. And I've met a lot of people who are obsessed with the art and the music and their culture.
That's interesting. That's an interesting point, because maybe anime, like the reason why so many more people are watching anime is because Japan being like so expensive to get to and so far away, but you can just see the same landscapes. A lot of anime use the exact same like environments and landscapes, and they just reproduce them in their episodes or films, and maybe that's just like a way for them to kind of visit Japan, but without like
spending
$3,000.
That's interesting. I've not considered that. Like it's basically saving you an airline ticket.
Exactly. You can just see the same.
I like that. I think that's a really great point as well, that it comes from an obsession with, or an interest, perhaps not an obsession, but an interest in Japanese culture and a way of life that is quite separate to ours.
In terms of customs and art and things, it's quite unique.
I think historically Japan has always been quite sort of isolationist country, hasn't it? It's always sort of exhibited quite a great deal of control over its its customs and its beliefs, and there have been many attempts by Western powers for hundreds of years to try and influence Japan, and it was always sort of rebuffed. And anything that was accepted was on their terms. And obviously that changed after the Second World War and the American occupation, but I feel like there is still like a deep connection to that sort of history and culture and the attitudes that come with that Westerners find appealing.
And it's like the contrast between those traditions, but they're also really technologically advanced. Sometimes even more than us. They're really efficient on the way they do things. And that contrast I find really fascinating. See like how does that work, and how do they manage to co-live in the same society?
That's really I like that. That's an interesting point.
Definitely. A lot of nanotechnology comes from Japan, and they're sort of famous for that as an export. I not quite sure how they managed that. But I just think it must be really insulting in a way, because what happened is they had all these like very traditional, very unique and interesting customs, a really unique culture that then got partially destroyed by a kind of superpower that is now fascinated by those cultures that are largely gone. You know what I mean? It's really interesting. Yeah,
it's interesting how it loops around, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like all those films where there's the like white man character just using katanas and a bunch of Japanese objects, and it's like, I don't know, I'm not sure why are you doing that.
It's
like Last Samurai.
I was thinking
Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I think, is he loosely based on a real sort of one of the few sort of non-Japanese people to become a samurai, but I think it's definitely over-egged for Western audiences, isn't it?
Like of all stories, of course, they'd pick that one.
Well, that
one's good. Yeah.
Tom Cruise is like, this looks good.
I could play him. I could play that guy.
Interesting. I sort of, it's quite interesting because I was doing some digging on trying to find like how anime, managed to sort of just come away from Japan and into the Western audiences. And the earliest example I could find was Astro Boy.
Oh,
So 1963.
Really? Okay.
Old manga.
And that was a lot older than I thought it would be. I thought it'd be a lot more recent than that. And that just shows my sort of complete sort of, lack of knowledge on the subject. But I was quite surprised by that. What do you think about that? 1963.
That is a lot earlier than I was expecting. Was it like an isolated incident that didn't appear again until I was thinking like the late 90s? I was thinking.
I think it lasted for about 3 or 4 years. And
right.
I think basically what happened was colour TV arrived.
Right. Yeah.
And Astro Boy was black and white. And obviously, as it happens when a new technology comes along, anything that came before it is immediately seen as archaic and not worth your time. So that sort of killed it for a little bit. But I think creators were pretty hot on the heels of bringing sort of obviously animation or anime into the world of colour, and then it sort of carried on a steady trajectory from there. But it really exploded, I think, from a Western perspective in the sort of 80s with Studio Ghibli.
Right, okay.
So like 80s work like Kiki's Delivery Service, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So like family-friendly films that, obviously that has a huge appeal in itself.
Yeah.
I think they were still being cut to buggery by Western distributors.
Were they being dubbed as well?
Yeah, so dubbed really badly.
Yeah.
Cut to ribbons.
Simplified, I imagine.
Yeah. I guess to make them as palatable as possible for Western audiences.
Yeah, that in itself is kind of interesting. I'm assuming they don't do it as much anymore.
No, there's a reason why. I'll tell you in a moment.
Oh, really? Okay, I've got something on that as well. Yeah, be interested to hear that.
Yes,
tantalising.
But I think you're right. It sort of goes back to what you were saying earlier about this idea about the sort of pervasiveness of Japanese culture, in the sense that it's obviously a real interest for lots of people.
Yeah.
It's partially down to the Western occupation of Japan.
Yeah.
But it's that same power that obviously changed a lot of the Japanese way of doing things.
Yeah.
That sort of has put Japan where it is, but is also quite oppressive towards a lot of the sort of old ways, and yet it's those old ways that are a source of fascination to us.
It is such a strange loop.
Such a weird,
strange loop. But the reason why, I don't think this is probably the only reason, but Miyazaki, obviously the granddaddy of anime, in the eyes of Western audiences anyway. Studio Ghibli's head honcho, the big man, the boss. He was sending films over in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, and I can't remember the name of the distribution company, but they were cutting them.
Right.
And then Disney and a subsidiary company of Disney, Miramax, land the rights to these films. And he was in charge of Miramax at the time. Harvey Weinstein,
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
infamous for lots of reasons.
But
in the context of this discussion, infamous for cutting films to the absolute bare bones. So he would recut movies.
Yeah,
and he sent studio notes over to Miyazaki saying, "We're going to cut your film. What do you think?" and Miyazaki sends him a samurai sword and a note that says no cuts, and that's it. And since then he's never had any cuts.
Ooh, yeah, I remember reading about that. Actually,
it's cool, isn't it?
Miyazaki, as inventive as he is in his films, he's quite like a square guy when it comes to action. Like he wouldn't. He's like really into 2D animation and wouldn't try anything else and stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh really? So he sticks quite rigidly to.
Yeah. He likes doing his things his way.
Okay.
Is it cell animation? Is it that style?
Yeah.
So doesn't use any computers still to this day.
Not at all. There is this like infamous video of like a class of students that are studying CG animation, and they show him what they've done, which, to be fair, it looks like just like a bit of a mess, but it's like an innovative program that they're trying to show him, and like Miyazaki just looks completely unimpressed and tells them that that's the ugliest thing he has ever seen.
Oh wow! Okay. So he's a bit of a purist.
He's a bit of a purist.
Kind of like the Nolan equivalent for animation, I suppose.
Yeah, literally.
Christopher Nolan's like, the film's the best. Yeah, it's like cell animation's the best, mate. I do think that's interesting though. Yeah, kind of holding on to tradition, and I'm assuming he kind of is basically just in love with those images. Yeah, and he's probably got a really keen eye for knowing when something's being done on a computer. So there you go.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for that. I think we've spoken before about having admiration for almost romanticizing filmmakers or people within the filmmaking process who rely on sort of tried and tested classic techniques as opposed to just defaulting to CGI.
Yeah,
it's almost been seen as like a like a middle finger to sort of the more modern sort of blockbuster studio approach, which is just fucking CGI everything.
Yeah.
And there's almost more artistry to it, even though CGI is a lot of fucking hard work.
Oh god. Yeah.
It's almost become so ubiquitous that people just expect it, and thus the attitude towards it from a creative perspective is just feels the same.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with things like that, and I quite admire him for that, even if it might make him a bit sort of prickly in certain situations. Like those poor students, they must have had like their fucking hearts ripped out.
Yeah, they look a bit sad, I'm not gonna lie.
Like if you met one of your heroes and he was that critical, it would crush you, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But in the same way, I sort of admire it. Not that he crushed people's sort of hearts and hopes and dreams, but I admire that sort of in a time where people, or certainly the industry. I mean, this is we've mentioned this a few times in this podcast, but obviously the sort of looming threat of AI being a real driving force for strikes in the industry. People are so willing just to accept technology before they really understood how its place will affect people's livelihoods.
Completely.
And I'm not saying that new animation style with anime is going to affect livelihoods, but maybe from his perspective it feels sort of closer to what he's trying to achieve, which is closer to his culture or his view of his own culture. So
and just using a tried and tested method, it's probably more expensive, it probably takes longer, but in his eyes, and I'm sure in a lot of other people's eyes as well, there's a kind of earthy quality to it that is irreplaceable. I'm thinking like, have you watched any Corridor Crew videos? No. They did like there's a technique, basically, I won't go on about this for too long, but there's a technique where you can film yourself and then change it into like an anime style. Okay. Like a filter almost. It takes, it's a lot of work still, and there's a lot of fine tuning you have to do, but they do that, and they like made an entire little mini series, like an anime mini series. And it's weird though, you can still tell. Yeah. You can tell, like I remember I watched that video right after I watched I think it was Ghost in the Shell. I'm like, oh mate, there's something computery about this. It's 2-3 dimensional, and those sort of little micro movements you have with your hands, and that makes it appear 3D, like it's there. So
it is odd. And I think him being so hell-bent on using traditional animation kinda, it almost keeps his films fresh among all the CGI, because even in the anime world, the CGI is slowly taking over, with a bunch of anime series just being made CGI with this like 3D look that a lot of fans are not really happy with. But it's like a faster and less, I guess maybe it is expensive, but not as expensive as 2D
Yeah,
it's just a faster, because like anime, they just have to make them fast.
I guess for the demand so high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it is a faster way of doing them. So there is, every year there is more and more anime that are making CGI anime.
Yeah.
More and more studios. So yeah.
Yeah. They're in a bit of a bind, aren't they? I think, because I think obviously, like you say, the demand. There's so many. They have to make so many episodes, and they have to sort of knock them out, and the temptation to embrace those technologies must be immense.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just, here's a more efficient way of working.
Yeah.
Do you want it or not? Like, and the odds is obviously going to be yes if they've got to knock out 23 episodes in a year. Like, it's crazy.
Especially when you consider a lot of the studio heads are probably people that are going to be more money-focused people. So they're not going to be thinking about, like, the history of the medium and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
they're just going to be thinking, how can I maximise profit as much as possible?
Yeah.
So...
And you're like, I can employ less people, but make them make more episodes just by doing CGI. And you're like, let's just do that then,
Yeah.
There's it's generalists that make it as well. So like, it is true that it is less people getting employed because they're all generalists. They can do everything. Yeah. Whereas before you had a departmental structure that you could employ hundreds of people and they can get cut in half because all it's as long as you know how to use a keyboard and a mouse, you're away. It is interesting. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realise it was quite that bleak.
Yeah.
And this is what we're going back to before about saying about the way in which I think as viewers, we obviously we will just take most viewers will just take what they're given, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that they're so passive that they just don't care about what happens to people, but a lot of people just aren't aware of the amount of work that goes into things like this, and the sort of politics behind the scenes. I mean, it's only becoming that sort of discussion is only becoming more mainstream as a result of the strikes that are happening now. We all willingly accepted streaming services because it was convenient and easy. But the reality is that changed the whole payment structure of how the writers, for example, are paid and all that sort of stuff. So I think this is what I mean when I think people like Miyazaki are important, because they sort of remind us to not only be considerate of the history of the medium that we love so much, but they remind us that we have to sort of consider these things before we just readily embrace them so quickly, because we don't really know what lasting impact it could have negatively, not just on the medium but the people that make it so special. So one thing that always strikes me about anime is that there are a lot of people that love it, obviously. But there are a lot of detractors that don't like it. And I've had so many conversations with people, and we'll be talking about movies, and they'll be like really enthusiastic, and then I'll be like, oh, and this film, and they go, what is it? Oh, it's an anime film. And the look on their face, it's almost as if I've just like shat on their living room floor. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, and I wondered why you think it is that people have that belief that anime is for like is nerdy or is strange, because I hear that quite a lot as well, that it's strange, and I wondered if you could sort of help me unpick why you think that is.
Okay, so I had, and I'm ashamed to say I sort of semi had that opinion about anime. I think my initial impression of it was that it was a bit like there was some weird, and this isn't based on anything I'd personally watched, but through the grapevine somewhere, someone at school would talk about it in a kind of in a sort of almost sexual context. And there's
I've seen your hentai collection.
Well, here we go. This is
sorry.
No. And so immediately, right, that's a switch. That's like a not like a red flag for me or anything, but that's an odd concept to me. Like the idea of animated pornography is an odd concept, and I wasn't aware that that was just entirely an opinion I had that was based on like an offhanded comment or like that someone had said at school when I was 12 or 13 or whatever. And so I got this stereotype of the audience who watched anime as being like sort of 35-year-old sort of fedora enthusiasts, right? Whose rooms smell like tangy cheese Doritos. Like they're the proud owner of a computer tower keyboard and mouse that light up purple and blue when you move it around. And apologies if either of you own a kit of this, right?
Like an anime pillow.
Exactly. I think that I used to think that that was the only type of Western audience members that were into anime. And like I think in general I had some prejudices about Japanophiles that now thankfully have largely been quelled. But unfortunately the previous attitude I had meant I sort of unconsciously avoided it for that reason, for fear almost of being kind of found out that I'd watched some. But it's terrible, and as it turns out, it was complete rubbish. Like it was, just being a schoolboy. And it's such a shame because maybe I'd have a lot more to say about it. But unfortunately, I was, my opinion was marred by that. And it's only very recently that I've started to realise, like, based on like some of our friends sort of said, like, oh, that show's actually quite good. This show's actually quite decent. That's an anime. This is an anime. I'm like, okay. And then I realised I didn't even know Studio Ghibli was anime. I didn't know it was classified as such because it felt separate to me. It felt like kind of they're like paintings. I kind of for whatever reason I lumped it into a different category. What do you think about that? Am I a terrible person?
No, not at all. But I think that's a big thing. Like people just don't know what anime is, especially when they're kids. They're not gonna like go out and do their research. Because I remember, obviously, I would get stereotyped by being into anime. But I remember talking to people and talking about Dragon Ball, which was like a big cartoon that would be shown on TV. And most people didn't even know that was an anime. And then when I would tell them, they would be like, oh, there is no way, it's like anime are that weird thing. And I'm like, no, they're like any other cartoon that there can be an action anime that is sick as Dragon Ball and stuff like that. So I think like people just have like a really specific perception of what anime is, and they just will not like stray away from that.
So it's almost the issue almost is a lack of understanding of the definition of it, right?
Exactly. And normally I would say it's just like if I say it's a Japanese cartoon. So if the word cartoon kind of eases people into it, and I'd be like, it's literally like, I don't know, like Rick and Morty, but made in another country.
I think it's interesting sort of picking on the sort of sexual element, because I think that's something Satoshi Kon does really well with Perfect Blue, sort of talk. It almost feels like a bit of a comment on that in a way. But no, I think as with any subculture, it tends to be the sort of easiest butt of a joke, doesn't it? I think if you're like a part of that, and obviously the connotations that circle around it, I think it can be sort of quite a hard label to shake, particularly from people whose sort of interests are sort of arguably more mainstream, or they have a less of a vested interest in that sort of aspect of culture. But I do wonder if sometimes with, now it's become so mainstream, obviously there are still people that are very sort of, I find with things like this, there are some people that still like to try and classify it as a subculture. And I think it's those people that can have a negative impact on people's enthusiasm or willingness to engage with it. Because I think there are just some hobbies where it's okay to be obsessed with because it's more socially acceptable. But there are some hobbies that like that, which I think still has sort of that lingering sort of negativity towards it. That if there are some people that are perhaps a little bit more defensive about it, then it's going to have a knock-on effect, I think. And I think that's still a part of the problem.
I agree. But I think, like, I know we always go back to Studio Ghibli, but I do really think that their films have massively helped those prejudices, like, kind of, decreasing through time. Because, like you said, you didn't know it was even anime, because it does look completely different visually from any other anime. So I think for people to show someone their films and then reveal to them that they're anime, that kind of just changes their kind of approach to what anime is. Because of how they've been animated.
I literally, before when we decided to do this episode, I I was confused when you said, the Studio Ghibli ones. I was like, oh, are they anime? Is that what they are? Okay, right, yeah. And I looked up the dead literally on Wikipedia, and I was like, oh yeah, of course they are. Right, yeah. Like if that's the definition of it, then I've got that all wrong. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I had this strange, like, horrible kind of preconceived notion that it was all it was like I had like sort of pubescent girl with massive eyes. That was sort of what it was to me, and it's a horrible thing to sort of admit, really. But that was what the image was in my mind, that it was just like giant eyes and like
school uniforms,
and like high voices. I think
there might be some of that.
I mean, they do exist, but it's not the only kind of of anime.
Yeah. I mean, that is a visual trope. I'm sure it is, but like, based on that one image alone, like, I'm not sure why I thought that I came to that conclusion. But there you go.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Giordana, but I sort of feel that like it's like any medium. There's going to be tropes of a medium, which some aspects of it are going to rely on consistently, because that's what a lot of people like.
Yeah.
So there's going to be Dragon Ball Z, and there's going to be loads of sort of like imitators, right? Because that's how culture works on a broader level. If something works, people are going to remake the same thing. We think of like detective shows. You can't, you know what I mean? But every once in a way, there's going to be a really fucking good detective show that stands above all the rest. Yeah. And I think it's just the same with anime. Like, obviously, I mean, this is obviously down to personal taste, of course, but there's going to be lots of stuff that's probably in the realms of anime. It's not really going to interest me too much. I'm personally not that big on the Dragon Ball Z thing. Yeah. But, like, I know that if I sort of looked hard enough, I'd find something that probably would appeal to me, either through the sort of like the approach to storytelling or themes or ideas, or just the animation techniques. So, and I think that's what Studio Ghibli did for anime, is that it made people stand up and realise that this is a serious art form that should be treated as such.
And I think like everything else, anime has massively transformed into different things over time, and I very much think it's because of the target audience that in each era they were going for, because like all those anime that you talk about with the big eyes and stuff, that they did exist, because I remember just hating seeing like this cool female character. She's even like a badass and everything, but she would be like sexualized in the animation. And it was because back then they were mostly targeted for teenage boys. And as more and more girls got into it, that's how it kind of started transforming into a wider genre. You would start finding different kinds of anime. Because even back then there is two main genres, which is one is called shoujo, which literally means for girls, and then the other one is called seinen, is for adults, and I think shonen is literally for boys, and shonen used to be the more popular because that was the only like genre that you could find action in, but that was also the most sexualized one. And that was the only one that they would show overseas. As more girls got into those kind of anime, then they realized that they were like, okay, they do not like seeing all the female characters constantly put down, so maybe they will try and mix it a bit. So I thought as the target audience changed, fortunately we got a bit
more nuanced anime. Like school outfits and big eyes, and
the prejudice lingered, I guess, which is why it still put a lot of people off for years and years afterwards. It's crazy.
It can be really hard to shake that image as well for some people, I think. I think they genuinely think there are some people I know, and I don't hold this against them necessarily, because we can't all be into everything. But like, that they will never watch an anime film based on those preconceived sort of notions about sort of, as one of the things we talked about.
Even with a colleague earlier, I was talking to him, and only recently started watching more anime, but it is like Studio Ghibli and Satoshi Kon, because they do visually look a bit different.
Yeah.
But then I recommended Your Name. I don't know if you've heard of it or
I have, but yeah.
Which is a bit more. It is beautiful animation, but it's a bit more traditional. It doesn't have it has bigger eyes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know why, I just find it so cringe, which is probably that like subconsciously it's known all the stereotypes, and even though it doesn't consciously agree with them, they're just still, there at the back of your mind. So
no, I think you're right. I mean, even to the extent I was sort of 21, just moved to Bristol with a chap called Gordon, and he's big into his anime. He really liked it. He used to watch Bleach a lot. There was something called Bleach. Have you seen Bleach?
A big one.
Yeah.
It's come back, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
New season out.
Yeah.
Everyone's watching it now.
Yeah. He used to watch it. Watched an awful lot of it, and they had this, it was a small flat and we had a massive telly, so it was different. But I used to switch off. I used to go on my phone, I used to go on my laptop, I used to do something else. Like I refused to engage with it, and it was because of that thing in the back of my mind. I was like, no, I can't watch that. You'll be ostracized. Like, you know what I mean? It's such a stupid. I should have been a bit more of an adult about it. Just sat down with him and watched some.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. It's a shame. But there you go.
I think there's something to be said about the thing we've sort of mentioned them quite a lot now, but sort of Studio Ghibli, Satoshi Kon, Akira, all that sort of stuff. It has a sense of prestige to it, doesn't it? It's like the canonical anime.
Yeah.
So I think that they have a broader appeal than like
sure.
the anime that perhaps you tried to recommend to your colleague. And I think that's really strange because on the one hand, obviously, it's blown it open for people to see anime for what it is, as valid as any other sort of art form. But I think it's still almost really difficult to, even with the existence of those films, to remove those biases
completely.
Yeah, strange. Should we talk about a few of those films?
I'd love to.
Yeah. I think because.
What do you want to start?
Should we start with Studio Ghibli?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your favourite Studio Ghibli film, actually?
That's a great question. I have like a top 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So obviously it has to be Spirited Away.
I
love Spirited Away. But then I also like Whisper of the Heart, which I think was a different director. But Spirited Away is Hayao Miyazaki. Whisper of the Heart it's someone else. And then When Marnie Was There, which is one of their more recent ones. But yeah, those ones are my top 3. So what about you guys?
I think The Wind Rises is probably my favourite. And maybe Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is close.
Yeah.
A lot of wind going on.
A lot of wind.
Yeah.
It's a pattern,
Probably it would be either Kiki's Delivery Service or My Neighbor Totoro.
Okay, nice. Classics.
Because My Neighbor Totoro was the first one that brought the studio to the West, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Westernised.
Yeah.
Oh. I love it. How about you?
I don't have a top 3. I've got one that I think stands above the rest for me, and it is down to a personal experience I had. Princess Mononoke. Yeah. I really liked that. I thought there's a cool wolf in it, and there's a really lovely scene that takes place in the middle of a forest which uses light really well. I remember it's a strange little story. Like I watched it. We had a science teacher who 2 weeks before the end of term, she was like, right, sod this, just got the telly out, stuck loads of films on, and one of them was Princess Mononoke.
And
I remember, not a bad shout, to be fair.
It really, everyone was dead quiet throughout that whole film, and just bearing in mind a bunch of 15-year-olds who probably all had preconceived ideas about anime. But no, it was great. Like I for once, I didn't have to learn about electrons or up and down quarks. I was just watching this
shit. Stick some Ghibli on.
Exactly. So I was really transfixed by all. I don't actually remember the story very well, but I remember that one being the most entertaining. I watched Spirited Away at the wrong time. I think I had an expectation as to what it was going to be like, and it was something very different, a lot more surreal.
Same. I had the same, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I wasn't my memory of watching it. I remember being a bit baffled by the imagery,
because that is the only one he's won an Oscar for, isn't it? Spirited Away.
Okay.
So I think there's a sense of expectation on the basis that it's the best, which I would disagree. I still like it, but
and he refused the Oscar, didn't he?
Did he?
Because I remember, I'm pretty sure I remember recently reading about that, but for some reason it doesn't I don't know, the Oscar awards.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of people have strong opinions about the Oscars.
I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
if, like, you know, he's trying to, you know, he's trying to share his vision with outside of his own culture, and the only way people respond is by cutting it to ribbons. Like,
yeah.
You know, I wouldn't necessarily blame him.
He didn't accept it in 2003. And he said, I didn't want to visit a country that was bombing Iraq. So it was like a political statement almost.
Right. Yeah.
Good old Miyazaki.
Yeah, sticks to his guns.
But it does show in his films. A lot of his films have like political undertones. Like Princess Mononoke is kind of almost about war. Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
That's the thing, I think, again, when we talk about this idea of, like, you know, people realising obviously this medium can convey so much more than just school uniforms,
exactly.
giant breasts, you know. But, like, you know, like Miyazaki clearly has, like, as you say, a very strong political motivations in all of his films. I feel like chiefly his films are very environmentally focused. There's a huge environmental concern.
Yeah,
he's obviously deeply anxious about technology.
Yeah,
he's almost, but alongside that, he's fascinated by it. So many of his films are fascinated. Like, he's got a real fascination for planes. He loves planes.
Oh, right,
yeah. When he was growing up, his family owned a factory that made the rudders for planes.
Oh wow,
so, like, his interest, So, like, The Wind Rises, for example, I think is perfect, because it's about the chap that invented or went on to invent the Zero, the Japanese fighter in the Second World War.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can tell there's this real sort of, like, duality to Miyazaki as he's creating this movie, because obviously he fucking loves planes and loves aviation and loves the sort of artistry and human endeavour and the ingenuity, and understands that technology in the right hands can be used for so much better.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's also sort of mortified that all of that sort of creativity and ingenuity is just being used for something that's going to hurt people.
Yeah.
And that seems to be like a real theme of his work, whether it be environmental. You know, he always seems to sort of characterise all the technology as like these big, hulking, sort of monolithic, really sort of overtly sort of industrial age machines that just churn smoke and smash through forests and crush deer. And, you know, like, I think he really has a big place in his heart for the admiration and fascination with technology, but he isn't convinced by the current trajectory of it.
Yeah.
And then the way humanity is using it then and now, you know.
Yeah, and I think he's worried about people, because a lot of his films are character driven, and like in Nausicaa especially, it's very environmental, and it really basically tells people, like, it demonizes people for what they're doing to the planet. Or even I'm not sure if you've seen Pumpogo.
Do you know, I haven't?
About
no.
these raccoons with, like, they have like massive testicles, but they are trying to save the planet somehow. It's a bit of a messy film, but that also has like a really environmental undertone. And the main characters are animals, and it's, you know, people are just destroying the planet. It's sort of like, just, you know, it's kind of like, you know, having a mirror in front of people and telling them you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Like that.
Did he do Howl's Moving Castle?
He did.
I thought, based on what you were saying about the technology and stuff, and how that worked was very anti. I always kind of thought it was. It seemed like it was anti-progression in terms of technology moving forward, and it's interesting the way he kind of characterizes that by this giant, like, hulking steam, like all this sort of steampunky castle moving about. I watched that quite recently in preparation for this, actually. I quite enjoyed it. I liked how it sort of it seemed to, and this is the case for a lot of Studio Ghibli films, actually. Is it Ghibli or Ghibli?
I think it's Ghibli. I remember looking it up, and I looked up an interview of him saying the name of the studio, because I was like, Ghibli. I need to know which one.
It's Ghibli.
He says Ghibli, at least in that one interview I watched.
No, you're probably on something there. Fine, okay.
There's an H in it, so I always get confused.
Yeah, I used to say Ghibli, but then there was this whole, discussion, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to confirm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, you've heard it from us. Yeah. But no,
our friend Miyazaki says.
Yeah.
Ghibli.
So, like, it treats magic as a kind of normal everyday occurrence. Like, there's no majesty to it. It's just there. I always thought that was kind of interesting. And all the majesty in the film comes from the designs, like, not from the fact that magic is happening. And like, you can fly and you can kind of grow wings and stuff like that. That's all just kind of matter of fact. I thought that was fascinating, the way it kind of handled the more mystical elements of the plot. It just kind of it presents a world to you where it's normal, and I thought that was really, really cool. And that's I might be wrong in thinking this, but I remember Spirited Away having a similar vibe.
A lot of his films do that. Like, that's a great observation, because I remember when I watched Kiki's Delivery Service for the first time, I remember being amazed at how have you seen Kiki's Delivery Service? So the plot for you who hasn't seen it, is this witch. Basically, she goes away from her family to kind of like find herself. Okay, you know, like another identity, a bit of a journey. It's a coming of age thing. And she ends up working with this, like, I think it's a bakery, and she does deliveries for them using her magic. And I remember being amazed at how casually Studio Ghibli films can turn magic into such a like mundane thing. And I was like, it's insane that the whole film is literally just someone working, but it's so fantastical just because she's a witch. I remember Howl's Moving Castle having, you turned into an old lady now. And she's not shocked by that occurrence. She's shocked by her age, but not by the fact that it's happened. Literally.
I like that. That's I never thought of it.
That's quite great.
It's interesting to note about Kiki's Delivery Service, actually, because that sort of goes into something else I sort of want to heap praise on them for. I think we talked about this right at the beginning with our Disney episode.
Yes, you've mentioned it in the past.
Because any excuse to sort of rag on Disney, but no. But I think what I really love about that movie in particular is that sort of how subtle that coming of age experience is. And I think it speaks to the human experience more broadly, and to sort of like, if we put it against Disney movies, I think the characters in Disney films, their desires or their wants and needs, or the things that are going to improve them, are quite big. They're quite big things. Get my voice and become a human instead of a mermaid and marry some bloke. And stuff like that. And that's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I just think these things are quite seismic, and I really feel like it's influenced a generation of people that sort of life is all about these seismic, massive things that are going to happen to you. And I think it leaves you quite ill-equipped for the realities that most of the things you learn about people or yourself are quite small. And they sort of build up over time. I don't know, like, not to get too sort of wanky, but that's how I feel. Like, and I think it took me a long time to realise that as a sort of kid growing up, that a lot of the things you realise aren't these huge things. And I think Studio Ghibli does that so well, in that the growth of Kiki is so minimal. But it's noticeable enough to know that she's learned from what's happened over the course of the movie. Because
it's literally just her getting a job. And that's what happens in real life.
There's that wonderful bit when she delivers bread to the elderly woman. She starts talking about like mortality and all that sort of stuff, and it's just like quite throwaway in the context of the plot.
Such a good film,
because the film just feels like almost like a series of like vignettes, like all these little meetings with these. Obviously, there's a through line, but like she meets all these little, these little individuals who've got their own stories and their own memories and their own demons and their own wants and needs. It all feels normal, in a way, despite the broom, like you said.
Despite the broom and the magic,
exactly,
for sure.
But I feel like the characterization, and I think that's present in all of his movies, even with like Princess Mononoke. Like there's a sort of like coming of age love story in that, but again it's not sort of this operatic smoochy sort of climax, you know what I mean? I just think that's something that's really commendable, and I think it's something that I feel puts Studio Ghibli on the pedestal above Disney in that regard. And I think like, I'm impressed with Miyazaki, because I think he has managed to create an environment where everyone is on the same wave. Because I remember finding out recently that like Kiki's Delivery Service isn't even by Miyazaki, but it's from there's like almost another head that's done loads of films for them called Isao Takahata.
And that film is from him, and it does the same style. So yes, they've managed to create sort of this like environment where their priority is sort of like a more grounded coming of age story or like identity search, but kind of sprinkled with some, fantastical, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Howl's Moving Castle does it in a sense as well, in that the character's growth is illustrated by her age, and I didn't realise it until quite late on in the film, but there are moments in the film where she becomes younger and then gets older again and becomes younger, and it's not like you say, Danny, it's not like a grand moment when she becomes young again. It's like a gradual change as this curse kind of gets lifted, and like the way that her character development is illustrated is largely through her sort of physical appearance with regards to age. But yeah, no, I didn't actually think about that, but what you guys said then actually,
that's funny as well, because age is sort of like that anyway. I mean, I know it might sound silly because we're in our early 30s and you're in your mid to late 20s. Mid or not late, mid.
No, mid to late.
Yes,
I'm almost 27, so I should actually accept it.
Sorry.
That's all right.
But no, like obviously it might sound a bit sort of weird coming from us, but I notice that now. Like when I think about my age, I don't really think about it that often until now and again. I go, oh yeah,
true.
Like I'm not like and I guess in this sort of earlier part of your life, it seems more noticeable. I guess I think it probably gets more and more noticeable when you like can't walk or
but it
use the toilet. Or,
it's not necessarily linear. Or, I mean, I know like time is linear, but the way you perceive your own age probably isn't. Like you'll probably have good days and bad days with it, and it's interesting to watch that play out in Howl's Moving Castle in that notion.
Satoshi Kon.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's like the opposite of Studio Ghibli. That's like you go, the pretty. I mean, it's still pretty, but like it's way darker, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I feel like him and Miyazaki. I feel like on a similar sort of. I think obviously Studio Ghibli is far more prolific. Obviously Satoshi Kon's life was cut tragically short. He died at 46. 46. So he didn't get to sort of perhaps have that long creative journey that obviously Miyazaki has had and continues to have. But I think his work, as you say, Giordana, it occupies a different side to what we talked about earlier about anime having this, obviously being able to tell, really sort of expansive, very introspective stories. But in this case, it's more sort of analytical about, I guess, acts of the human condition, psychologically speaking, and how that sort of fuses with culture. Like Perfect Blue, I mean, for me, is one of just the great films. I think one of the greatest. It's probably my favourite anime.
Okay, yeah.
It's probably my favourite, one of my favourite films. I'd probably put it in a top 20, probably. If I had, the top 20, I'd pop it in there. I think when I was sort of doing some digging about Kon, and I always found in his work that this guy clearly has he's clearly really influenced by sort of quite lofty sort of psychological theory. Like he's really into like Jungian, like Carl Jung, the idea of like the face, the mask, and persona, and how these things are sort of like the things that you construct in society, or the masks that people construct for you, which is like, or the sort of personas people construct for you, which is particularly pertinent in the case of the film that I apparently really like, and I've completely forgotten the title of. Perfect Blue. Like this is someone who is basically subjected to what people think she is. And it's across the spectrum from like adoring fans to like a fucking like stalker, basically.
Right. Okay.
The stalker is basically, it's the extreme end of the scale about how we like with celebrities, how we almost imagine how they are, and then when they don't behave in the way that we want them to, that's when like we get this sort of strong response. And of course that's the extreme example with the stalker.
But it does happen, because I'm not sure if it's true, but I remember reading that it was like loosely inspired by some real maybe events, or like something similar was happening to another idol that kind of people connected the two, because that does very much happen in Japan and Korea especially. There's such a strong idol culture, where there are these companies that take kids and train them to be a certain type of way. And they don't only like train them into dance or singing, they train them in the way they have to behave. That basically, when they debut, they're this like a fake confectionery of an idea.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that's probably why the fans struggle to like put one and one together.
Yeah.
And I feel like Perfect Blue is such a good exploration of that whole thing. Yeah.
It's sort of evocative of, or sort of reminds me of the way like the old sort of classic Hollywood studio system would treat its actors and actresses. Like, obviously when actors and actresses were contracted to the studio, and someone realised that obviously we can make these people famous, and then subsequently we can make more money through the films, because if people are invested in the actors and the performers or the artists, then we can, if they're interested in them, that's going to be our draw.
Yeah.
And that meant they had huge control. I think we've talked about this before, but like changing names, getting rid of like who you are, your background, your culture, your history, who you are as a person, just to make you more palatable for audiences, or what the producers at the time thought it was the best sort of for those audiences. There's like classic stories about actors being like forced to marry each other, and then you'd like walk into a house and the house would be split in two houses. You know what I mean?
Man.
Like it's all that kind of like really dark, fucked up shit.
Judy Garland got that, didn't she?
Yeah.
They made her smoke and stuff, and they made her like just keep her weight down, and they gave her like barbiturates and stuff. It was an awful, grisly stories. I've not actually seen Perfect Blue, but my interest is sort of morbidly piqued.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it really captures that. I mean, it's sort of like, it's interesting you talk about that sort of that cultural perspective from like Japan and Korea, because it sort of feels like sort of almost a hangover from that period of
exactly. It's basically something that happened in America, and even though it's probably happening, it's just they're more subtle about it, while it's still very much not subtle in Japan and Korea. But also sometimes I think about it, and that shows in Perfect Blue how growing up that way, because you're so young, it must also like completely change or like mess up the way you perceive yourself, which I think in Perfect Blue it's a big thing. So is in like Millennium Actress and Paprika. They also deal with them having different personas and different views of themselves.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. I think that was it's surely one of his recurrent themes.
Absolutely, yeah. The sort of the way, that sort of perception, and how that perception is not necessarily the way you want to perceive yourself, but because it's been artifice or a construction that's made for you for sort of marketable reasons.
Exactly, yeah.
Like you don't even know who you are, your own person, and that obviously impacts your sort of sanity, your mental health. Yeah, that's a real reoccurring theme, and it's so viscerally explored in Perfect Blue. I mean, it's a beautifully animated movie.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And you were saying before, I'm sort of saying this to remind you, I'm not stealing your point, but you were saying before we started recording about how Con, takes animation to the next level.
Oh yeah, I remember watching Paprika, and the thing, obviously, I think it's come across that I just really like animation, not just Japanese, but in general.
Yeah.
And it does bother me sometimes that now there is almost this obsession in making animation as realistic as possible. And people will strive to recreate things in the exact same way as they are in real life. And I was like, but why would you use animation for that purpose? And I remember watching Paprika, and there is basically there's these sequences where there is a parade following and stalking some characters, and each character, each element of that parade is has completely different design from the other.
Yeah.
And I feel like it uses so many colors, so many different designs, and so many it just went crazy with that film.
And
I was like, I've never seen a film like an animated film just use so many different kinds of elements to it.
Yeah.
And I was just really impressed by it.
I think there's that sort of that willingness to sort of just push the envelope so far, and I think Con does that so well. And I think you're right in what you're saying about why would like animators play it safe. Obviously, if it makes sense sort of thematically for the story they're trying to tell, then fine, of course. But like, I think Con understands that, like, obviously he anchors things in very real themes and ideas, but you know, that sort of distortion of reality is such a central theme to his work.
Exactly,
so the animation style, and like you say, just sort of going absolutely crazy with it, like balls out of the bath with it, suits that approach.
Yeah.
Because these characters, they are sort of losing grip on reality, and his films lose grip on reality, particularly Perfect Blue. You feel like the narrative and the character, just the reality is just slipping away. And as an audience member, you feel the reality slipping away. I feel like that animation, that approach to the animation, is central to that. I think.
For sure. Or like there is in Paprika, there is this one scene that really had an impact on me. Basically, Paprika is like a fake persona that this character called, I'm not sure the name is like Chiba or something like that, but she uses this persona to help people. And there is this scene where Paprika's skin almost gets like pulled off, and the guy, his arm falls into her. And this, this kind of really visceral sort of like manipulation of her skin happens to reveal Chiba under her. And I was like, of course he would do that. Like, that's what animation is for, is to be able to recreate stuff and just fuck with your mind pretty much.
Create your own reality,
and you can tell from his use of animation that he really knows how to achieve that, like, really disturbing.
In a way that's not showy either, because I think there's a danger. It's quite a sort of fine line between sort of being thematically and visually appropriate and just almost looking like you're being over the top. I think Con really nails it. I love it.
It's great.
I also you mentioned Millennium Actress. I watched that for the first time yesterday. And I really like it too. There's a lot of familiar themes, but it's arguably not quite as sort of dark in its presentation.
Yeah, it's a bit more linear, because it's pretty much about this actress. She meets this guy when she's really young, and throughout the film, she chases him just through her entire life.
Oh right.
She's an actress, so every film is like a different era of her life. But that very much blurs the lines, because almost real life gets turned into a film multiple times.
Oh right, okay,
you can never tell if it's a real life or if it's the film. So that's very much. I feel like Perfect Blue came out before that, and that came out a few years after. But I feel like I could see some of Paprika in there. The whole, deception between reality. Fantasy, as well as there is some comedy that then you find in Tokyo Godfathers.
That's really interesting you say that, because I remember thinking with Tokyo Godfathers, like, he actually has like an eye for like genuinely like good comedy, like funny moments. And
I thought that's his most normal film.
Most linear by a mile. But I think it's interesting you pick out that idea in Millennium Actress of like each sort of film role representing a different sort of part of this journey. There's also this idea about the sort of like going through Japanese sort of film history. I think if you think like, because from my perspective, obviously, like I really like anime, but for me, like I've really always, since I got into film properly, Japanese cinema has always been something I've really loved. So obviously, Akira Kurosawa's, Yasujiro Ozu's, etc., these great filmmakers who made these films, and what I love so much about Millennium Actress is that it almost feels like it's sort of using the sort of like visual and sort of thematic nods to each of those sort of filmmakers and those grand films. So there's like during the war period where the films are a little bit more overtly pro-Japanese, which a lot of the actors of the time started out in. And then obviously post-war American occupation, the films obviously a lot more sort of, they're not particularly patriotic. It's like filmmakers wrestling with American occupation and the clash of ideology between East and West, the preservation of their culture. And then you've got like the samurai film bit, which is like, this is just like, Kurosawa.
It very much feels like a tribute to cinema because there is different genres.
Yeah,
you get her going to space at some point.
Yeah.
So it's him just like professing his love for cinema almost.
Yeah, that's it. I literally think like the key theme of that film is like people die, but films are forever.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like, because it's like,
much...
like films are so important as like cultural, historical touchstones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think when people talk to me about movies, that's why I think is so important about them. It's like preservation of history. It's like culture and history, and the sort of windows into things that that you can go off and look into yourself.
Yeah, or like the way society behaved in certain eras.
Yeah.
I always thought of that when people ask why do you like them so much, and I'm like, because there's these small windows into societies and cultures, like you said, that we just don't have ways of knowing. Yeah, it's
really interesting as well. This is one of those things I thought I was really clever for noticing, and I did some research and I was like, I'm not that clever. But,
Gone.
So when I was watching the film, it reminded me of an actress called Tsuko Hara. So she was really famous in the sort of post-war period Japanese cinema, but she's most famous for her work with Ozu. She did work like Tokyo Story, and the Noriko trilogy. So she's like this iconic character. And then when Ozu died, and I think in 1963, she went into exile and didn't even no interviews, nothing. And she even admitted she wasn't even that into acting, just a way of earning money for her family.
Oh wow!
Which I think it's hilarious because she's so fucking brilliant in all these films. And she's honestly, she's just as a actress in particularly sort of the Ozu films, or certainly in the Noriko trilogy, which is her character. She's just a fucking ray of sunshine in those movies, and to think she's actually not that bothered about acting is hilarious. But yeah, she just went into exile, never spoke to anyone. Then I think she died in 2017 or something. She had a 50-year exile.
Wow.
And I was like, this reminds me of that. Aren't I clever? And then a cursory look. I always start my research on Wikipedia. Typed in Millennium Actress, it came up. It was Con acknowledging her. It's loosely based on her. So it's one of those things I thought I was clever, and I was like, I'm not clever, I'm just a fucking idiot for thinking I was clever. And that shows again that Con has a real cultural and sensibility, a sort of a broader knowledge of his, of cinema. Which sounds like a silly thing to say, given, this guy's obviously a huge part of that culture, and why wouldn't he be into those things as well?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But yeah, no, I just thought it was quite interesting. Slightly embarrassing for me.
No, mate,
not
at all.
It's good. It's good that you noticed. I had no idea. So.
Oh, well, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, no.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other sort of anime films away from them that they would like to mention?
Yes. I've recently watched one called Mind Game, which is from Yuasa. And that was the first, when I said that Satoshi Kon was the guy that used animation to its fullest.
Yeah.
That was my second time watching a film and being like, this guy, freaking, maybe it's not, I don't think he's as elegant in it. I think maybe it's also a bit clumsy, but it was his debut film. But this film doesn't just use different colors and stuff. It literally uses an endless amount of techniques, because you've got 2D animation, 3D animation, you've got some I'm not sure what the actual name is, but it's when you photograph someone's face and then you put it on an animated body.
Rotoscoping?
Not quite. There is some rotoscoping, but also
that's as far as my animation
there is
knowledge goes.
Also some rotoscoping, but there is also this very uncanny.
Yeah, it's you're reprojecting
something like that
performance onto a 3D model. Yeah,
exactly.
I think it's called photogrammetry.
Yeah,
something along those lines.
But you've got that. You've got some silhouette animation going on and stuff like that. But he literally, and the film itself, the way I describe it to friends is basically it's the most flamboyant way of saying YOLO. Because the film is about sort of just going with
seize the day, right?
Yeah, stop worrying about stuff.
Yeah.
Chill, do your thing.
Yeah.
And it does it in the most fun way.
Yeah.
Which, I feel like everyone should watch this film. And it's probably not everyone's cup of tea because it is really quirky.
But it sounds to me like he, the filmmakers are using the camera is like a paintbrush, right? It's like a blank canvas, and this is like, and the reference isn't reality. It's whatever you make, and that's like the wonderful thing about animation is that it can be whatever you want it to be. It can be not derived from real life reference. It could be derived from the strange goings on in your own mind, and it's an expression of that, and that's fantastic. And also the YOLO thing's interesting because an awful lot of films have that message in some form or another. I think it's about the way that you can present that to people, and if you can make it feel genuine, like perfect. You know, it doesn't matter that it's been told to you 6 or 7 times in previous cinema outings. Like, if it feels unique at the time, that's like really commendable. So remind me of the title again.
Mind Game.
Mind Game. Okay, nice. I could have just gone back and listened to that again. Sorry.
It's good to ask. But no, I really like the way you described it. Like, it's like a blank canvas. It really just threw a bunch of stuff in there.
So fantastic.
It's really good. So that would be my recommendation of the day.
Oh, nice. Ben?
I also watched Ghost in the Shell, based on, which is
masterpiece,
the classic, and that's
Scarlett Johansson one, right?
That's the masterpiece. The other one is just Neil Bush.
I do want to mention that one in the context of the original. It's 95, I think it came out, because I watched it not expecting to love it. Based on what I was saying earlier, I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it was really, really, really dark, really gritty. The story was kind of confusing enough for me to actually get invested and like, okay, I really need to listen here. Bought on Amazon. Doesn't come with a subtitled version, so I had to watch the
Amazon
dubbed.
is so annoying for that.
So annoyed. I was literally seething. I was like, this isn't what the filmmakers intended at all. And they all had American accents, and it was tough. But visually, it won me over anyway. And I
you
really
still enjoyed
it.
You managed to enjoy it. So
completely, And I was baffled by how much the Matrix ripped it off.
Gotcha.
I think they admitted that they were like Ghost in the Shell was like our main inspiration.
You can really tell. Like, it's so down to the design of the way that humans get plugged in to the like the eggs and stuff. Oh my god. I still love the Matrix. I didn't mar my appreciation of that film. And they are, like you say, they are very forthcoming about how they were influenced by anime and manga and things like that. I thought it was oddly, kind of going against what you were saying about, the animation being a flourish of someone's mind. This one was actually quite restrained, I thought. I thought the main reason why it was animated was to portray a futuristic world. But if you watch it, like, a lot of the way, I hesitate to use the word camera, but the frame is like ground level pretty much all of the time. And I watched a video about the remake and how they left that bit out, and they had all these swooping shots of this sort of steampunky futuristic techno city, and it's like I just realised this is audio, but you know what I mean. And that's part of the reason why it didn't work as a sort of live action remake, was because it ignored that ground level sort of not real world, but the sort of as an exercise in restraint. I thought
that's interesting. I find you're actually right. It's way more realistic in its depiction of the way people look and the way the environment looks. But I find those eyes really like disturbing. And I was like, maybe rather than like going crazy, it was really specific about the design of people's like appearance.
They're sort of oddly
kinda, she doesn't, those eyes make her look uncanny. And considering what she is, like she's the only non-human character. I was like, that kind of makes sense. But it is an interesting observation that you make.
I feel like the sort of more dreamlike aspects of the film, when they did happen, they really popped. Like the bit where she's diving. It kind of goes a bit dreamlike and surreal, and they really stood out to me as like exemplary scenes. Or the bit at the end with that big tank in the kind of a band, that's very Blade Runner. I thought that whole ending was like incredibly Blade
Very
Runner.
much
I don't know
so,
how inspired it was, but like it just meant that like for the majority of the film is still heightened reality.
Yeah.
But then you get these dreamlike sequences, which just pop.
Yeah.
Massively.
Do you reckon maybe also like an intentional thing to limit, to be more restrained in other parts, and then?
Yeah. I do think maybe. I mean, I haven't done enough research to know if that's true or not. But the way it's animated, like the camera's always ground level, like moving with things like boats, or just there's that big montage in the middle where it's just people walking about.
Yeah, that's the
like,
thing.
yeah.
I was reading up on that just yesterday, and apparently that's the thing he has in almost all his films.
Okay.
He just has like a montage.
Just a moment
with the same composer. He uses the same composer and just shows off, maybe just like showing off a bit. Yeah,
it turns into like Koanas for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like an animated version. Yeah, I loved it. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed Ghost in the Shell.
It just it's sort of like how cyclical the sort of like the influence sci-fi has on itself, isn't it?
Yes.
I think you're right that Blade Runner clearly was a touchstone for Ghost in the Shell, but Ghost in the Shell has just gone on to like influence so much. It's such a fucking iconic movie.
The
same way like Akira, like you just think.
That's sci-fi.
The design work and the sort of and the themes, and you just think fucking hell, like that is. Like everything about that movie is so beautifully designed.
Yeah.
Like the best sci-fi films are. Like I'd put those films at the same level. Perhaps not personally, but in terms of design. As with Alien or 2001. Like movies that really understand the sort of intricacies of building that sci-fi landscape. And how important that is to the themes and ideas of the films. Fucking great. Such a good film. I've not seen it in ages.
Don't get it on Amazon.
No, I don't. I think I have it on DVD. I might have to upgrade.
Got on it. The Japanese.
Nice.
Lovely.
Nice. Right, I'm going to end with, before we go for the outro.
Yeah.
What film would you pick to convince someone that isn't into anime to try and win them over, and why?
Oh, what a question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll let you... Do you want to go first?
No, I mean, I feel like the obvious would be Studio Ghibli.
Yeah.
But like if because I have such specific, like I'm someone that likes really weird looking animation, so I'm probably the worst person to ask this question. Like obviously I would say Man Game, but I know that's not gonna sell anyone on anime. But yeah, it would probably be something from Studio Ghibli, or like recently there was this film that really is called The First Slam Dunk. Which is like, it is a CGI anime, but I think it's so well done, and it's about basketball. It's like this, this team, and it just follows them through their backstories in this one match, which I feel like the sports would, make it more accessible.
The window in, right?
For people,
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, but if not, it would probably be like Studio Ghibli, and it would be. I mean, other than the popular ones, I thought when Marnie was there was a bit less fantastical, and it really dealt with, like, I'm not gonna spoil it, but it dealt with really closely with a specific family dynamic, like between two, father and daughter type of thing. I'm not gonna say this is a spoiler, but I'm not gonna say specifically. But I feel like that would probably be very relatable for people. Yeah.
Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works.
Hell yeah.
No.
Just for the title.
What title? I love the titles.
I can't believe that's a real title. No, I'd have to say, I mean, based on my very limited exposure to anime, it's got to be Ghost in the Shell, because I could basically just say, do you like The Matrix? Do you like Blade Runner? Well,
there you go.
There we go. This is an animated film.
That's good. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
This is an influence on this film, and has been influenced by this film. Like, it's an in between, and it's only 90 minutes. Like, give it a go, and you probably won't be disappointed. I imagine.
No,
probably
It works anime's favour, doesn't it? Actually, the shorter runtime.
I think so.
Yes.
You can squeeze it in.
Honestly, especially nowadays, it's like insane how long films have become.
Yep.
I don't know what I pick. Yeah. I asked the question without even fucking thinking what I pick. I think you're probably right, John. I'd probably go for a Ghibli film, and this is assuming they haven't seen a Ghibli film.
Okay.
I'm saying that to get away with the fact I don't know enough about anime to my suggestion. I would probably go for Wind Rises, actually.
Okay, nice.
Because it's like historical, there's a romance.
Nice.
And there's the sort of moral battle with the character is sort of the central character is very lofty and very sort of, it's a timeless theme, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think I'd go for that.
That's on my list, right? Wind Rises and Mind Games. There you go.
I'm
going to watch both of those. And, because they sound really great.
Yeah. They are really nice,
yeah. Right, outro.
Ooh.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it then.
Yes.
Another episode in the bag.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Giordana.
No problem. It was my pleasure.
Oh yeah, honestly, pleasure is ours. It's really good. It's been a long time coming, but it was absolutely worth the wait.
There it was. Yeah, really enjoyed that.
Next week, Past Lives.
Yes.
A film that both me and Giordana have seen, have already spoken about quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's going to be right up your alley.
Yeah, it looks. I mean, I saw a trailer for it. I think probably at the Watershed actually a while back, or maybe elsewhere. But and based on what you guys were saying about it, does sound like a film I'm going to really sink my teeth into and enjoy. So hopefully. It's a special movie, I think, a movie that really, because initially I was a bit sort of lukewarm to it, but as the film went on, I was fucking hell, and by the end, and it's still sort of something I'm thinking about almost constantly.
Yeah, it kind of lingers with you, I found, but it's not just straight up sad. There's like a kind of heaviness that was left after. That was like I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was, Yeah,
I do love films that linger with you, especially in the sort of sense of sort of romantic films. They do have a tendency to sweep me off my feet a little bit. I'm thinking films like Call Me by Your Name. I think about that film to this day. I've only seen it once. It really lingers with me. So very much looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Right. See you then for that one. But in the meantime, enjoy this one and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.